You buy a plane ticket. The airline gets the money. You probably assume there is a margin in there somewhere. Fuel, staff, a small profit at the end. That is the reasonable assumption. It is also, in the most technically accurate sense, wrong. In 2024, Southwest Airlines posted an operating margin of 1.2%, a carrier that sold over 160 million seats, just barely in the black on paper. But that 1.2% is not from flying. When analyst Courtney Miller at Visual Approach Analytics stripped out all loyalty-related revenue from Southwest's accounts, the margin became negative 19.9%. From the airline operation alone, the planes, the crew, the gates, Southwest lost nearly 20 cents on every dollar of ticket revenue. And Southwest is not a special case. In 2024, all 5 of the major U.S. carriers, Delta, United, American, Alaska, and Southwest, would have posted negative operating margins without their loyalty programs. Every single one. Losing money. On every flight. So the question is not how airlines lose money on every ticket. They do. The question is, what else are they selling? And who is actually buying it? To understand the whole, you need to sit with an airline's cost structure for a moment. Airlines move hundreds of tons of metal through the stratosphere at 500 miles an hour. This is not a cheap activity. Fuel alone typically accounts for between 20 and 30% of all operating costs, sometimes more, depending on the route and the year. Then labor. Then maintenance, which for a commercial aircraft is not optional. A full heavy maintenance check on a typical narrow-body aircraft runs into millions, and it is required by law on a strict cycle. Then there are airport fees, slot fees, catering, insurance, passenger liability, aircraft leasing. A typical short-haul departure generates costs measurable in the tens of thousands before a single bag has been checked in. Airlines have tried to close this gap in every direction. Checked baggage fees, seat selection charges, change fees, priority boarding, the unbundling of the ticket into 100 microtransactions. All of it, combined, still barely covers the cost of operating the machine. The airline industry has been financially precarious for most of its existence. Aviation economists note the industry has destroyed more capital than it has created, which makes what happened next even more interesting. In 1981, American Airlines launched AAdvantage, the world's first modern frequent flyer program. The pitch was straightforward. Fly with us, earn miles, use them for free flights. It was framed as loyalty. Reward the repeat customer. Keep them from defecting to a competitor. Every other major carrier followed within a few years. By the 90s, the miles economy had expanded well beyond flights, hotel stays, car rentals, grocery shopping, and by the mid-90s, airlines began partnering with banks to issue co-branded credit cards. You could earn miles without boarding a plane at all, just by spending money, anywhere. The conventional reading of this history is that airlines found a clever, relatively cheap way to reward their best customers. Miles cost almost nothing to issue. Most people redeem them suboptimally, and the program creates a stickiness that benefits the carrier. A smart loyalty mechanic. That reading is incomplete, because as the credit card partnerships grew, they stopped being a side product and became, quietly, the central one. The airline had discovered something. It could manufacture a currency, sell it to a bank, and the bank would pay cash for it. Real cash. Every month. The loyalty program was not a reward scheme. It was a printing press. Here is the mechanism. When Delta issues you a SkyMile for spending on your Delta American Express card, that mile did not appear from goodwill. Delta sold it to American Express, in cash, before you spent a single penny. American Express buys miles from Delta at wholesale. Industry estimates put the price at roughly a penny to a penny and a half per mile. The exact rate is commercially confidential. American Express then distributes those miles to cardholders as a spending incentive. The cardholder uses the card. The bank collects interchange fees from every merchant that accepts it, typically 1 to 3% of each transaction. A portion of that interchange is effectively recycled back to the airline as payment for the miles it sold. The merchant subsidizes the flight. The cardholder is the conduit. Every time someone pays for groceries, a hotel, a car service, a school trip with a Delta Amex card, a fraction of that transaction finds its way back to Delta. Not because the person flew, not because they boarded a plane, because their spending behavior is exactly what American Express is paying Delta to cultivate. Delta and American Express have had this arrangement since 1996. In the early years, Ed Bastian, now Delta's chief executive, recalls it was tense. In his words, "We would have difficulties with Amex because we could never figure out whose customer it was. Amex thought it was their customer because they had the credit card. Delta thought it was our customer because we're providing the experience." They resolved that. In 2024, the partnership paid Delta $7.4 billion, not from flying, from plastic. $7.4 billion from a single credit card agreement. To give that some shape, it is more than the combined annual revenues of Spirit Airlines and Frontier Airlines in their best years. Delta made more from one bank partnership than two entire competing airlines make from actually flying people around. Bastian has stated publicly that Delta card spending, what his cardholders collectively charge to their Delta Amex cards each year, approaches 1% of U.S. GDP. 1% of the entire American economy flowing through a single airline's credit card. And Delta receives a cut of every transaction. Delta's president, Glenn Hauenstein, told investors at the end of 2024 that premium and loyalty revenue combined now accounted for 57% of Delta's total income. The majority of the airline is not airlines. The majority is a financial services operation that happens to maintain a fleet of aircraft to keep the product credible. Across the whole U.S. industry, IdeaWorksCompany reported in January 2024 that in the previous year, the 6 major U.S. carriers collected more than $25 billion from their co-branded credit card programs alone. $25 billion from plastic. That is, for context, more than the U.S. airline industry has ever collectively earned in net profit in any single year. Remove that figure and the industry collapses. Delta without loyalty, operating at minus 2.5% in 2024. American without AAdvantage, minus 8.3. Alaska without its mileage plan, minus 11.4. Southwest without Rapid Rewards, minus 19.9. These are not struggling businesses being propped up by a loyalty sideline. These are loyalty businesses that maintain an airline to make the loyalty program believable. Nothing made the true structure of the industry more visible than March 2020. The pandemic grounded the global aviation industry. Aircraft sat idle on runways. Revenue evaporated. Airlines needed billions in emergency liquidity, and they needed collateral to borrow against. What they pledged tells you exactly what they believe their real business actually is. They did not pledge their aircraft. In a world where every airline was simultaneously trying to raise cash, aircraft values had largely collapsed. Too much supply, zero buyers. They did not pledge their routes, their gates, or their takeoff slots. They pledged their loyalty programs. In June 2020, United Airlines raised $6.8 billion in a securitization backed entirely by Mileage Plus. The bond documents, the formal documents investors read before committing capital, valued Mileage Plus at approximately $21 billion. United's total market capitalization at the time, the entire airline, every plane and every route, was $10.6 billion. The loyalty database was worth twice the company that owned it. Delta raised $9 billion that September, backed by SkyMiles. American raised $10 billion in 2021, backed by AAdvantage. Together, those three programs secured more than $25 billion in financing, more than the combined equity value of all three airlines at the time of the deals. Investors did not hesitate. They were entirely willing to lend against the miles because the miles had something the aircraft did not, a bank paying for them every month, regardless of whether a single flight had departed. The aircraft were worth nothing in a world with no passengers. The loyalty program was worth billions with not a single seat in the air. By 2024, the scale of this operation had drawn official attention. In September of that year, the U.S. Department of Transportation sent formal letters to American, Delta, Southwest, and United, ordering detailed disclosures on their rewards programs within 90 days. The concern was not the business structure. It was what that structure meant for the person holding the miles. You earn them by flying and by spending. You accumulate them over months, sometimes years. But the airline can change what those miles are worth at any moment. No advance notice required. No compensation owed. Pete Buttigieg, who was Transportation Secretary when the probe launched, said it plainly. Unlike a traditional savings account, these rewards are controlled by a company that can unilaterally change their value. Rohit Chopra, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau director who joined the investigation, added that consumers were paying high interest rates and fees to participate in these programs, yet these tempting points and rewards programs are often depreciated or changed with little notice. The tension here is specific. The bank paid the airline roughly a penny for each mile it distributed to you. Whether you can redeem that mile for half a penny's worth of travel or 2 pennies worth depends entirely on the airline's dynamic pricing at the moment you try to book. You are last in the chain. The bank is protected by a contract. You are protected by goodwill. Both Buttigieg and Chopra left office when the administration changed in January 2025. Whether the probe produced findings, enforcement, or was quietly shelved has not been publicly confirmed. The programs, and their terms, remain entirely at the airline's discretion. So here is what the modern airline business actually is, in a single sentence. It is a miles manufacturing operation, funded by banks, which operates a flying service as the mechanism that gives the miles their value. The planes are not the product. The planes are the proof. Without the airline, the miles are worthless. There is nowhere to redeem them. So the carrier maintains the flying operation, even at a loss, because the flying is what keeps the currency credible. The losses are not a flaw in the model. They are the model. When you buy a ticket, you are not, in the most economically accurate sense, the airline's primary customer. You are part of the story the airline tells the bank. The bank is the customer. You are the behavior the bank is paying the airline to cultivate. Your journey to Edinburgh or Orlando is proof of concept. Every time you tap your airline credit card, a slice of that transaction flows back to the airline as payment for a mile it sold to the bank months ago. You are not earning a reward. You are completing a circuit. You are not the passenger. You are the engine. Delta earned $7.4 billion last year from a deal that started in 1996, when 2 companies resolved an argument about whose customer you were and decided the answer was both. The planes still fly. The tickets still land in your inbox. But the business you are participating in, the one that actually turns a profit, has very little to do with getting you from A to B.